So I do want to transition to our next topic, though. 62% of Democratic voters say that they want new party leadership. And I have to tell you, this is something that I came across yesterday. And personally, I'm kind of surprised that that number is that low. And that I think that again illustrates just the grip that I think a lot of mainstream media still has over the Democratic base. Because as far as I'm concerned, the number should be way higher. But that's just me being in my own bubble. I think maybe I should be glad that it is finally over 50%, getting over 60% now. You are, I think we mentioned this in the previous live, we had some technical difficulties, but I think you're the first person to come on with these Substack conversations that I've been having who isn't firmly in the left, who doesn't identify in that kind of a way. And so I'm kind of interested to get your perspective here, from somebody who's more towards the center about what's going on with the Democratic Party, because from my perspective, it is a party that doesn't truly represent its base. And it upsets me a lot. I constantly talk about how the party needs new leadership, how if it's ever going to truly oppose the Republican Party, that it actually has to have just a brand new representation to it that frankly, I think just needs to be torn down and rebuilt. But I will save my thoughts here for a second. What are your thoughts about the Democratic Party, and do you think that it needs new leadership?
Yeah, full disclosure. Yeah, I don't really consider myself a Democrat or Republican.
Yeah,
I did come up, many, many years ago now. I was very firmly in that Bernie camp. That was kind of my first foray into truly paying attention with what's going on in American politics is through that 2016 campaign
yeah,
for Bernie Sanders. And that was my first awakening. Because I think as a kid, I kind of grew up in a more liberal area and we were just taught, Democrats are good, Republicans bad. And that was my first awakening to say, whoa, okay, so I think the Democratic Party is not as democratic as I thought
yeah,
through that process. And so, in terms of the number, 62%, yeah, it does seem low. But I think, in looking at some of the numbers, I saw one recently, Pew Research, I think still 70, 80% of Democrats who are people who identify as Democrats trust mainstream media. And
yeah,
it's much, much lower in the Republican Party. I think it's down to maybe below 50% at this point in terms of trust of mainstream media.
right.
So they have a much more narrow, still kind of a very gate kept ideology to say, hey, no, this is what the party believes in. If you don't believe in this, you're kind of not a part of our party. So I think that has some impact. And so I don't really, I mean, one of the reasons why I left the Democratic Party is because I think the Democratic Party is in a lot of ways more dishonest than the Republican Party um, in terms of representing their base, because they talk a
Yeah,
lot about human rights, immigrant rights, and all this kind of stuff. And this is
yeah,
especially pertinent now because of the ICE protests. And I was kind of, I spoke out a little bit against. I mean, I am not for what was happening with ICE, but I also had to remind people, Obama was doing the exact same thing. His numbers are actually even higher. And people would say, no, they were doing it in a much more judicious way and they were following the law. And I said, no, that they were not following the law. They were rounding people up without due process, and they were shipping them off. And sometimes they mistakenly arrested American citizens as well. There are a number of reports of this, and you can go find it and Google it if you want to. So then I thought, okay, so then this means that this whole protesting is I think is a manufactured outrage against Donald Trump to say, oh, look at what he's doing. And objectively, you could say, oh, what he's doing is not so good. Um, but the only reason why you're activated against it now is because he's the one doing it versus somebody else in the past that was a member of your party. So I found that to be kind of disingenuous. I know a lot of people on the right were saying, hey, all these protests are like AstroTurf and George Soros is paying people and this and that. I I don't
yeah.
I don't think that's
I
true,
don't know
but I
why
do
people
think that
say
there is a
that.
lot of media. I think there is a lot of media driven outrage from the left to say, "Wow, look at how bad things are. Look at how much of a dictator he is." Um, and I think
Hmm.
that part I think is manufactured. You can astroturf something and then get it real and get real people activated. Like if you go on the street and talk to people, are you paid to be out there? 99% of them will say no. But
Right.
you ask them why they're out there, is like, well, I saw this in the news, I saw that, and it's now because they're starting to highlight these stories in a human way. They're saying, oh, look at this guy, hairdresser, shipped off to El Salvador. This other guy who was a father, and this happened. And so
Yeah.
now you're seeing pictures and faces and stories about these people, whereas in the past the media never did that under Obama or Biden, even though I think similar things are happening. Trump is a more, he's a TV guy, so he likes to make a spectacle out of things. He'll send Christy Noem down and do like a photo shoot, or he'll do stuff that is more made for television. But yeah, that's kind of. I know you didn't ask the specific question about that. I've drifted off of your initial
No,
question,
it's okay.
but
We'll come back to all that.
those are my thoughts on that. And I just think the Democratic Party can't properly represent its base because the donor base is it's so similar to the Republican Party in many, many ways. So
Yeah.
how can they represent different people, right? I think the Republican Party does a pretty good job of representing their donors and then spinning a narrative that makes sense to its base to say, well, you need to work harder. You need to, go out and take what's yours. And if you're not successful in this life, it's up to you, self-determination, this kind of thing. We have to cut taxes because that's how the economy will boom, right? That's a coherent story. Whether or not it works, you
Yeah.
can't really say for sure, but it's coherent versus the Democrats are saying, well, no, billionaires are bad, except the ones that donate to us. We like those guys. And, we also are against shipping off, immigrants, but we also don't represent them all that well. We don't want to take that next step to say, to actually enact any policy change. And then we're also, we don't like wars, but this war is okay because we need to defend Israel. And so none
Ugh.
of it is coherent. It doesn't make any sense. And then there also, if anybody speaks out within the party, like David Hogg, well, we got to get rid of that guy. Uh, I don't know. I don't know all the details to that, to be honest with you. But I don't know how they nullified his election within the DNC leadership. I have no idea how, but they did.
Yeah, no, they did, and that's something that was really concerning to me. But the Democratic Party, as I continue to be like a broken record with this, but I just truly believe that they cannot go on, or at least we cannot go on having their leadership being intact because there is no continuity that currently exists that actually represents the people, for what they say that they need. I mean, I think because of the situation that we were in with the two-party system, and the fact that both these parties continuously crush any kind of, momentum to actually have an outside challenger from the left or from the right, we feel like we're kind of stuck in this binary of like, oh, which party more represents me? Because you don't really have a party that truly
Yeah.
represents you right now, right? And so I know for me, that is the situation that I am in. And it really just comes down to two different things. Do you want to try to help a third party challenge the Democrats, or do you want to see Democratic Party just be toppled and turned over and more accurately represent the leftern base of American politics? And it seems like the latter might be more achievable, but both of them are pretty challenging right now. But for me, I kind of like go against couple of your points here.
Okay, let's do it.
When Joe Biden was in office, and obviously you don't know my catalog here because I mean we don't know each other like super well. I was speaking out against everything that I didn't like about him. And I know a lot of other people who are on the left who do the exact same way. Like when he was coming out trying to force the what was it, the railroad workers, a couple of years ago, had to like break up that strike. When you're talking about him like saying like, oh, I really want to put this $15 minimum wage into the American Rescue Plan, but that damn Senate parliamentarian just got in the way. What are we going to do? I don't know. What are we going to do about that? Or when he just promised he promised over like 40 or 50 different things on the campaign trail in 2020. There was actually PolitiFact had a great like Biden promise tracker showing all the different things that he was going to do that he did not end up doing. There are plenty of people on the left who are criticizing him for it. I think the problem is that there are just so many people who are just satisfied just having him in office that they didn't care about criticizing him any further. There's a lot
Well,
of
who on the left? That's my question. Is who did you? Was there any CNN anchors or MSNBC people
no, but like
criticizing Biden,
I think like those people shouldn't be considered to be like
Or even Pod Save America? You could
right,
talk to the alternative folks as well.
right,
I
but
didn't see that many people. that
I
had
wouldn't call Pod Save America to be the alternative people if we're being 100%. I think you work for one of the alternative people, being, Crystal Ball being at Breaking Points, her husband, Kyle Kalinske, their friends over at TYT to a degree, Hassan Piker. I mean, you
right.
reference Candace Owens, but like she's also an outlier on the right when it comes to, actually going against Trump. The Charlie Kirks of the world, the Ben Shapiro's, the Steven Crowder's. I mean, like they're not actually pushing back against Trump. They're no different than Fox when it comes to actually like being all in for whatever he says. So I mean, I think these two bases, they to a degree have a really similar problem, which is the fact that whether you're looking at mainstream media on the left, mainstream media on the right, or independent media, there's a lot of just coalescing around the party establishment. But there is also people who are pushing back, in the mainstream or in the more independent sphere, but you have to go a little bit further down the chain. I wouldn't consider Pod Save America to be true independent media. I mean, they kind of
Well, I
go
don't
out
know
of
if there's
their
true independent left media. I don't know if that it really exists. I know Kyle Kalinske would probably, I would throw him in the truly independent left, probably still.
Hassan Piker is
But
not somebody who
Hassan,
I've ever seen. He's not out there perpetrating DNC talking points like ever.
no, that's true. Okay, so yeah, okay, I'll give you that. And I
Yeah.
think that goes back to, I do think that there is, I will amend, but and say that's probably that, I'll probably agree with you on that. But I do think that there is probably more diverse opinions on the right, a little bit more, just because the coalition is much more fractured. There's less of like uniformity on the right, um, just from an ideological perspective. I mean, there's charts that come out and say, hey, Democrats are much more aligned. Hey, you need to believe in all of these points or you can't be a part of this party, versus I think the right is much more of a mismatch.
Yeah.
Um, but and I also do think it has to come down to the ultimate ideology of who the party represents and the story and the narrative that they come up with. The Republican Party is better at doing that, right? Because they're better at saying, hey, there's a maybe a wage crisis, there's inflation, and it's because there's illegal immigrants, right? That's what they're saying. And
Okay.
the illegal immigrants are fundamentally illegal by definition. So even though it doesn't really, maybe that's not the true cause of it, it's a better, it's much more coherent to say, yeah, these people are causing problems, because then you can't go out and argue for illegal immigration, because that also doesn't make any sense, and normal people can't get on board with that. I just think that the Democrats are less good at spinning the story because it doesn't make any sense to them, because they don't have a coherent narrative to sell to say, hey, this is why you're struggling really bad.
Right. Well, I do think that there's a little bit of a misnomer here about the Democrats. I feel like sometimes, like what the Chuck Schumers and the Hakeem Jeffries and the top, like, apparatchik of the world, what they're willing to like put out there in the ether doesn't always represent everyone here at the base. I mean, and I think that there's also a lot of left creators who are either on YouTube or on Spotify or on Instagram or on TikTok. A lot of these people that maybe, if you're outside of the like traditional like political like sphere, you're probably just not going to know they exist, but they still command a large influence. Plenty of people who do push back against democratic, like leadership talking points. And I think this is actually kind of contributes to this conversation, because there are people, I mean, like, I know, for instance, I create content on Instagram. There are people who I'm friends with who have much larger followings than I do. These are people who get millions and millions of people who look at their stuff on Instagram and TikTok week in, week out, and they are not contributing to DNC talking points. In fact, they're upset with the Democratic Party, and they voice that consistently. I know that I was voicing it consistently. I was slamming Biden constantly last year and the year before that and the year before that, but particularly last year when it was talking about the genocide in Gaza. So I think there might be a little bit of a disconnect, because
Well, then why
maybe,
would you go out if you, or so you're slamming? So I give you tons of credit for doing that and speaking out.
yeah,
Um, but then at the end of the day,
yeah,
what exactly is the party saying? It's like, hey, if we need, let's say, more workers' rights, right? That's
yeah,
probably one thing that the base would want from the Democrats. They
yeah.
probably, how could you go out and say, well, we don't want to keep Lena Khan on board
That
the
makes no sense
FTC?
to me. Makes no
So
sense to
then,
me. Yeah,
so it does, right? And at least
no,
for Trump, it's like, well, I'm going to be deported. I'm going to mass deportation. So I'm going to put in a guy that's, all about that. And it makes sense. It's like, yeah, we want that. That's the guy. And so
right.
there's less of a disconnect on that side to say, I'm going to do this, but I'm going to put in somebody else that doesn't make any sense.
No, I think the point that you made about the fact that the Republican leadership seems to be more in line with what their voters want, I mean, I think I will agree with that. I mean, I don't agree with what the Republican
Right.
voters want, but I do agree that their representation does seem to be more in line with what they were asking for. They asked for mass deportations, they are getting mass deportations. The things that we ask for, we don't really seem to get from our party politicians. I mean, it seems like they're just willing to give us a bunch of excuses, which is why I'm so constantly trying to talk about how we need to get rid of them. I mean, I constantly talk about the fact that I want to see more politicians on the left primaried. You know, very much so. I want to see this whole party turned over. If I had it my way, we'd keep maybe 20 of them out of the entire
Right.
Senate, out of the entire House on the Democratic side, and then turn the rest of them over. Because I feel like the ideas that they claim to care about are ideas that I legitimately care about. They just don't actually go after them. They don't actually enact them. It's a lot of lip service, and that's my biggest problem with it.
Right.
Is the
And
fact
you're
that
seeing this play out actually live with the New York City mayoral election, right? Between
yeah,
Cuomo and Mondami. That's literally the
right,
Democratic Party battle that you're describing right now. Somebody who
right,
gives the lip service and somebody who says, I'm actually going to try to do these things. And
exactly.
look what's happening right now.
Yeah, no, this is again, this is kind of like gets to the crux of like my problem with all of this is the fact that like I legitimately want people in office who are going to do all of this, who are actually going to fight for affordable housing, or to fight to make things cheaper for people, who are going to go out of their way to challenge corporate power. And then we have people like Andrew Cuomo, who I do not even understand how he's even a relevant option whatsoever. It boggles my mind that he is a relevant option. The fact that he had all these people denouncing him and calling for him to publicly resign, and now they're all publicly backing him just like 3, 4 years later is mind-boggling to me to see just like the mental gymnastics that people are willing to pull right now. But yes, we're probably not going to get to the end of this kind of conversation here at this moment, but I want to just kind of like tail off by saying this. There are so many people who feel like they are stuck voting for the Democrats because they just don't know what else to do. They can't find themselves ever voting for a Republican. They don't want to just, get out of the political process altogether. And I don't think they should. So the Democrats seem like the only option. And I understand why a lot of people feel that way. I know that I feel that way to a large degree, but I think we can't just be satisfied with the status quo. You can't just be satisfied with just putting a Democrat into office. I think putting the right people into office is the most important thing, or else this cycle will just continuously perpetuate itself. It will never end. And so I just hope that people remember that, especially come like later this year, early next year when the primaries are going on. We desperately need different people to be representing us in the Democratic Party, or else this cycle will never end. It never will.